On today's episode of Locked On Wild, in this bold new Kirill Kaprizov era, the Wild need to strike a balance between security and opportunity.
Hey, this is Matt Boldy, and you're listening to Locked On Wild.
Hey, this is Marcus Foligno, and you're listening to Locked On Wild.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team each and every day. We thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day as well. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we're going to take a look at a few things that John Hynes will have to navigate this year, and it includes security versus opportunity and how certain spots in the lineup will be filled, as well as shoring up some weaknesses for this Minnesota Wild team over the last couple of years. My name is Seth Toupal, host of Locked On Wild, credentialed media member, and host of Seth on Sports, in addition to Locked On Wild here. We're going through everybody. Bill Guerin is getting one of these later tonight. Minnesota Wild are playing right now. Top line is just doing their thing. And Kirill scored tonight. Matt Boldy scored tonight. That top line really buzzing here to start the preseason. And it got me to thinking. So we obviously had our reaction episode to Kirill signing. If you missed that, you can find it on the Locked On Wild YouTube channel from earlier today. We'll have plenty of reaction to it here over the next couple of days. But it got me thinking too. You know, we talked about how this Wild team kind of, you need to push the chips in. And everybody's going to need to elevate their performance. Like your window, and I like how Trav put it in the comments. It's full bore next season, and you've got a few year window. You have to absolutely maximize it, and I think that even starts this year. But the point being is that there are some areas that I think need to really be looked at and shored up. And you got to avoid falling into the same traps, the same patterns that we have seen season in and season out. And I just want to start with this notion of security versus opportunity, because this is a big struggle that we have talked about quite a bit with this team, and it is not something that has just come about this year, but the eternal debate as to when to put a prospect in a particular spot in the lineup versus a veteran, and when do you lean on the vet, when do you understand that the vet is not giving you what you need in that particular spot, and when do you go to a younger player? And I think one of the big, because this is an evaluation period on John Hynes too. This is an evaluation period on Bill Guerin, on John Hynes, on the whole thing, the whole system. You have the driving instructor in the car right now, evaluating every bit of what is going on as you're driving down the road. So you got to make sure that you have everything ironclad and locked in as you navigate this extreme window of contention in competition that's coming up. And one of the things that we've seen from Hynes over the last few seasons is a tendency to rely on more veteran players. It's not just a John Hynes thing. This is coaches, by and large. They tend to trust veterans more. It's very much an old school league with a lot of old school mentalities, a lot of old school mindsets. And the tendency is just, you're not going to get the highs and the lows with a veteran player that you do with a prospect, with a younger player. So teams tend to rely on veterans to fill key spots in the lineup. But you can't teach a veteran new tricks per se. What you see is what you get. And I think this is one of the reasons that we saw Freddie Gaudreau shipped out. We've seen other players in particular that have really kind of become the security blanket for this team over the last few years. And don't get me wrong, Freddie Gaudreau, a very good player. But Freddie was Freddie. He was good at particular things. There were areas of his game that he was not particularly strong with. And I think there is just this kind of overarching mentality of we can't afford to have mistakes because a mistake could cost us a game. One mistake could lead to losing a game in the playoffs. It could lead to losing a series. But with where this is going, we talked about the cap distribution with Kirill Kaprizov starting next year, with his salary going up to $17 million per season. That's a hefty portion of the salary cap that he himself is taking up. And by having him at the top end of the salary cap of the Minnesota Wild payroll, you're going to need to have some players at the bottom end of your roster that balance that out. And it's either going to be players that take like vet minimum, one of which we're going to talk about here in a little bit, or young players on their entry-level contracts. One of the two. Now, you may be able to convince more appealing players to take veteran minimum deals to come to your franchise if you are, say, the Florida Panthers or the Vegas Golden Knights or the Colorado Avalanche or the Dallas Stars or any of those teams that have established legitimate cup aspirations. But the Minnesota Wild are not at that point. And what we have seen as far as free agency goes over the last couple of years is that there's a price to be paid for that. Is you're probably going to have to shell out a little bit more to get players to come to your organization as opposed to going somewhere else. You got to win that bidding war. And there will come a point in which, hey, we got to fill out our fourth line. Are we going to rely on almost NHLers, or are we going to give some opportunity to players who can maybe work into or potentially elevate into a role, depending on how they take the opportunity and run with it? And we're going to get a very clear picture of that, I think, even early on this season, because I am hearing some rumblings and whisperings and seeing just observations throughout the coverage of this team that we may have a real good example of one of those security blanket type players versus somebody who is battling for a spot and, maybe could give you a little more. It might take them a few games to get used to or work into a particular role, but they might be able to give you something solid as far as production goes. So I want to start today's episode by diving into sounds like a second line battle that's brewing between what has filled the spot and what could fill a second line wing spot. We'll talk about that as we continue today's episode of Locked On Wilds after this. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. The Minnesota Vikings are across the pond, taking on the Cleveland Browns in London. Sounds like the Browns are going to make a quarterback change. So if it were me, I would use my $5 bet to take the Minnesota Vikings -3.5. And then if you get the winnings, split them evenly on the Vikings to win the NFC North, which is currently +1,000, or the Vikings to win the Super Bowl, which is +5,500. That'd be how I would do it. If you want to use those winnings on live game betting, you certainly can. There are other parlays as well as futures bets available. It's all at FanDuel. FanDuel makes it so easy to navigate their app. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Again, thank you to everybody who has subscribed to the show here lately. We are up over 3,600 subscribers on YouTube, and we're going to keep you very much in the loop here as we get closer to the start of the season. We got a lot of fun things planned for you. I'm really excited for the direction that we're headed with this show. Just a lot of fun things planned, a lot of fun guests planned as the season unfolds, and you can hear about all of it as we get closer to October 9th, which is the start of the season. So I set up the eternal battle that seems to be brewing here for the Minnesota Wild between the security blanket and the opportunity. And I would like to present as evidence a lengthy tweet that friend of the show, Brett Marshall, put together because he was reacting to a discussion that took place on Worst Seats in the House regarding the second line. And an opinion that Marcus Johansson, to this point in his career, has done more than Liam Ohgren has. Therefore, he should be handed a second-line role this season as opposed to Liam Ohgren, because Johansson's a known commodity. You know what to expect. We don't know what Liam Ohgren is at this point. There's no guarantee that Liam Ohgren turns into a better player than Marcus Johansson. Is quite literally verbatim the notion that was discussed. So here's what Brett had to say. Unrelated, and this is coming from a point of genuine curiosity. 2 episodes ago, you say that the player playing with Eriksson Ek and Tarasenko can't be a passenger. Brett says, I totally agree. But then on the last episode, you go on to say Johansson gets that spot, insinuating that his whole time he's been something more than a passenger. Since 2022-2023, in 5-on-5 play, Johansson has played 812 minutes with Matt Boldy, 806 minutes with Joel Eriksson Ek, 75 minutes, 54 seconds with Kirill Kaprizov, 485 plus minutes with Matt Zuccarello, and 523 plus minutes with Marco Rossi. All good players. Boldy, Eriksson Ek, Kaprizov, Zuccarello, Rossi are all good players. They're all playmakers, skilled players. Listen to this. In those total minutes playing with that level of talent, Johansson has managed to score 20 total goals and add 35 assists. 55 5-on-5 points in 3 seasons playing with the Wild's best players. How is that anything other than a passenger? Brett says, I'll take my shot on the 21-year-old first-round pick who can shoot the puck and has filled the net at every level. Brett also says, I'd bet you $100 that he has a better career than Johansson, and it's going to happen before he turns 28. I mean, those numbers are hard to argue. I think we've known for a while that the skill that Marcus Johansson most notably has brought to the second line is speed and the ability to get into the zone cleanly. But is that a tangible thing? Is getting into the zone cleanly enough to warrant a spot on a line that has struggled to keep up as far as scoring goes with the top line? Second line was non-existent in the postseason. Second line struggled with Kirill Kaprizov out of the lineup. It's not like it's a legitimate thing. I've been talking as a host of this show about needing to get the second line ironed out for 3 years, almost on a daily basis. And who has filled that spot for a majority of those 3 years? Number 90, Marcus Johansson, 55 5-on-5 points in a 3-year span playing with those types of players. When you are going toe-to-toe against teams that have, look at what Dallas has as their second line. Look at what Colorado has as their second line. Look at what Winnipeg had before this year. I have major concerns about that second line for Winnipeg. But look at what the Florida Panthers deploy on their second line. Look at what the Edmonton Oilers deploy on their second line. A lot of those teams, the weakest link is somebody that can get you to 20, 25 goals. Is the weak link on that line. And Johansson's, I think, his high point. Now, I know he's not a primary goal scorer, but I think his high point over the last 3 seasons has been 11 goals. He had 11 this past year. He has since his return to Minnesota, he has 11 goals in back-to-back seasons, playing 78 and 72 games. Do we not think that Liam Ohgren can exceed that? I think Vladimir Tarasenko can even exceed that. And Tarasenko has been, he looked great in practice, but I got to tell you, in the games, I kind of am like, well, where did that go? Do we really not think that Liam Ohgren can outdo that? I know a lot of the listeners do. I know we're not the ones that are, clamoring for that. But do we really not think that Liam Ohgren can stumble into a second line role and get 15 goals? I think to assume that he can't is ludicrous, frankly. And so here lies this eternal struggle, this eternal fight back and forth between the known commodity, Marcus Johansson. You know what you're not going to get. You know what you're going to get. And the potential to far exceed that. What happens if Liam Ohgren steps into that spot and becomes a 25-goal scorer? Guess what? You got yourself a much deeper roster. And he has earned the opportunity, I think, to check that spot out, see what he can do in that spot because of the work that he's put in. And the idea that, well, because Marcus Johansson has more playing time at the NHL level, because he has done more to this point in his career than Liam Ohgren has, Marcus Johansson is almost a 1,000-game NHLer. Of course, he has done more in his career to this point than Liam Ohgren has. In my opinion, that is not the type of comparison bar that we should be setting. and maybe this is the non-athlete in me just missing the mark completely. But if you're basing your roster decisions on what a player has done up to that point in their career, that is a horrible recipe to try to be a contender now. Especially if you've got guys in their 30s. Yeah, they've probably done a lot, but guess what? Are they going to do that for you now? No. No, they are most likely not going to. So we're going to get a great look at where we're at from a coaching perspective, depending on who takes that spot. If you pencil in the guy that's done it before because he's done it before, you're tying one hand behind your back. If you're willing to go out on a limb, step out of your comfort zone, and be rewarded for great play, and a player who might say, you know what, this is great. I love this. I'm having a great time. I'm scoring a bunch of goals. Then all of a sudden you're like, okay, we got our second line wing for the foreseeable future. Cross that box off the list. But yeah, you're maybe going to have to deal with some growing pains. Well, would you rather deal with growing pains, or would you rather deal with questions all year about why a particular spot continues to be a glaring weakness? It can't be the second one, because as we're going to talk about to finish the show, there's been a glaring weakness on this team. Alex and I talked about it yesterday, but because the season's getting ever closer, we have to talk about the penalty kill and the special teams. And it's the same mentality and the same notion we just talked about. Do you take the secure options, or do you go out on a limb a little bit? Do you take a leap of faith that different players might lead to different results? We'll talk about that as we finish today's episode of Locked on Wilds after this. Final segment of today's episode of Locked on Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. Again, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. We're getting closer, and we're getting some guests lined up for next week to kind of usher in the season. So stay tuned. Should be a lot of fun next week. Now, I talk about the special teams as Kirill Kaprizov has a power play goal tonight, and Marcus Johansson is a shorthanded goal. Marcus Foligno. Marcus Foligno definitely getting a Locked on Wild bump from his performance on the show. So the Wild have a shorthanded goal and a power play goal against Connor Hellebuck and the Winnipeg Jets. But this is something too, like, if you're going to make a deep postseason run, if you're going to make a legitimate run with this team, with this roster, you're probably going to need a bit of an addition at the deadline, but we're not going to talk about that right now. We're going to talk about that when we get to some things that Bill Guerin's going to have to navigate this year. The special teams has been the boat anchor on this team for the last couple of years. And it has been one of the single most things that has led to their seasons ending, is the inability to kill off penalties. The Minnesota Wild this past season, statistically, one of the worst teams, coming off of a year in which they were flirting with the worst penalty kill of all time 2 years ago. This past season, the Wild were 72.4%. They were in the 60s for a long portion of the season. Now, one of the things that John Hynes did, to his credit, was the first thing that he tried was to cut back on the number of times that the team was penalized. The Minnesota Wild finished 22nd last year in penalty minutes, substantially fewer than they had in previous seasons. In 2023, 2024, they were third. They almost had 1,000 penalty minutes in 2023, 2024. In 2022, 2023, they were sixth in the league with 925 penalty minutes. In 2021, 2022, they were third with 882. So they've been a top 10 penalty minutes team for the last few seasons. Now, 2021, 2022, their penalty kill was at 76%. Not great, but with the amount of goals they scored, they averaged 3.72 goals per game. 5-on-5 play, they just worked people. So, yeah, if your special teams is bad, you can get through that in the regular season. What happened in the postseason? Power play and penalty kill just wrecked them. The 2022-2023 season, 925 penalty minutes, sixth in the league. Their penalty kill was at 82%, largely because that was the Philip Gustafsson year. That was the Vezina caliber year. 2023-2024, the Wild were third in the league, 938 penalty minutes. Their penalty kill, 74.5%. They were third worst in the league. It has been a problem for a while. And there are a lot of components as to why. It's not a singular issue that is causing this penalty kill to be bad. It is a multitude of things that all need to be fixed and need to be addressed. Inability to win faceoffs on the penalty kill, huge problem, has to be addressed. Inability to keep players from the front of the net, huge problem, has to be addressed. Inability to get out to the puck, being too stationary, huge problem, has to be addressed. These are all problems that need to be addressed, or you are going to suffer the same fate you suffered for the last 10 seasons. A team that just gets drowned by their own special teams failures. You have to be able to kill penalties in the playoffs. You can get by with a bad penalty, a bad power play. You cannot get by with a bad penalty kill. Of the teams in the postseason, the Edmonton Oilers somehow found a way, despite a 67% penalty kill in the postseason. So they found a way to get through, but it's rare. All of the teams that lost in the first round, Los Angeles Kings had a 61% penalty kill. The Wild were at 72.2. The Washington Capitals are at 71.4. The Ottawa Senators, one series, they were at 64.7%. The Devils, 68.4. The Avalanche, 69.6. These are all the teams that did not make it for the most part out of the first round. They got cooked by the special teams. You have to find a way once and for all to put a system in place that solves this. And let's take a moment as well to acknowledge the fact that as offense becomes more of a focal point for the NHL, it seems like the power plays are getting much, much better too. In fact, this postseason, here are the number of teams that were above 25%. There were 6 teams above 25% in the postseason this past year, including the Los Angeles Kings, who were at 40%. The Los Angeles Kings, the Montreal Canadiens, the Dallas Stars, the Vegas Golden Knights, Edmonton, and Florida all were at 25% or above. In the regular season, here are the number of teams that were at 25% or above. There were 6 of them. Winnipeg made the playoffs. Vegas made the playoffs. New Jersey made the playoffs. Detroit missed the playoffs. Tampa Bay made the playoffs. Pittsburgh missed the playoffs. So of the top 6 power play teams, 4 of them made the playoffs. If you go to the top 10, 6 of the 10 made the playoffs. And on the penalty kill side of things, Carolina made the playoffs. New Jersey made the playoffs. Dallas made the playoffs. Washington made the playoffs. Tampa made the playoffs. Los Angeles made the playoffs. Montreal made the playoffs. And Florida made the playoffs. 8 of the top 10 penalty kill teams in the league made the postseason. The only 2 that didn't were the Vancouver Canucks and the Nashville Predators. But 8 out of the 10 best penalty kills in the league made the postseason. You can get by with a mediocre power play. You cannot get by with a mediocre penalty kill. Teams will just exploit it to death when you get to the postseason. The Wild have had it happen 3 straight postseasons. So that is probably John Hynes' biggest test of the season, is how to get that thing respectable. Nico Sturm was brought in. That is an area he should help. Matt Boldy got some time there at the end of the season, and it sounds like that's something that is going to become more of a thing. If he is capable of making some plays, and I think Boldy's better defensively than people give him credit for. If he can help turn that unit around, absolutely give him an opportunity there. The point is, again, you're going with this same notion of security versus opportunity. And players are getting slotted into those roles because they've been there before. If there's somebody that can do it better, you got to try it out. You got to see if they can give you a better option. Because as far as the penalty kill is concerned, it quite literally cannot get any worse. It cannot get any worse than it was. Yeah, knock on wood for that. But yeah, that is our episode for today. We'll have one final episode coming up for you here, and we're going to take a look at some of the big things that Bill Guerin will need to navigate this season. His biggest tests for this upcoming season. We'll talk about that coming up here in a little bit. But again, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. We've got new episodes for you every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.